thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We're going to talk about Blazor Grid and what you can do with the Blazor Grid. The next multiple webinars are all on the Blazor Grid. We're going to mix in some app builder because of course they're kind of like hand in hand. But this one, we're going to go over like how to configure the Blazor Grid and some features you can set, some tips and tricks maybe. Then the next webinar in 2 weeks, we're going to do Blazor Grid CRUD with .NET 7. Of course, there are only a few things different between .NET 6 and .NET 7, but I want you to be aware of those in terms of how you can use our product and how you can do CRUD. So it'll include the web API side and the Blazor side. Discord is where you need to go to get the best answers from the product team. It's super fast. It's a big community that we're trying to build, and it'll just continue to get bigger and bigger with your support and your questions. Like, we want your questions. The more questions we have, the more we figure out how you're using the product and the more we can adapt. So we're running the Blazor product just like we've always run the Angular product. Everything's open, everything's public, everything's in GitHub, it's all online. You can look at the roadmap, you can look at the issues, and we really want to learn from you. So of course we make a better product. The agenda today, Blazor Grid, as I mentioned, mostly demo. I have one slide. Ask questions in the Q&A. Recording and deck will be sent tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started. This is my only slide. And by the way, there's probably more features once you get into the nitty-gritty, but what I wanted to do is give you a quick high-level overview of all of the things that you can do with the grid. So you're going to see much of this today in the demo, and we're actually going to start from scratch. And then I have a pre-built app. Everything's up on GitHub, so you can go ahead and grab it as well. But what we set out to do with the grid is we looked at, of course, starting with our Angular product, we looked at what you were doing in Windows Forms and what you were doing in WPF and how that can carry forward into modern web platforms. So on the Angular side, we sort of hit this critical mass of features. There's still probably, 10 or 12 features that would be great that we could probably get in this year or next year. And you would say, oh, it's complete. Because keep in mind, Windows Forms had like 20 years of development behind it. But now we're doing the same thing with Blazor. So how are you going to take your Windows Forms app or your WPF app and move it over to Blazor? You're not going to necessarily move screen by screen, feature by feature. You're going to reimagine the experience. You're going to look at the modern web, say, how can I improve this? But what our job is to give you features that you care about most. I highly recommend that you keep an eye on the roadmap online, because you'll see, if something's not available yet, when is it coming? So not only in App Builder, but in Blazor and Angular. So this is sort of that high level view of what's going on. So let's go right to a demo. What I'm going to do today is I am going to use Visual Studio 2022 Preview. The reason for that is, I'm going to use both. I have Preview and not Preview. My other demo will be using not Preview. But I'm running into all kinds of weird things with Blazor, just like, IntelliSense issues and maybe things just not feeling quite right. So I still think Microsoft is on this journey to get Blazor in Visual Studio a lot better. In fact, I was talking to George earlier, and he mentioned on the Mac, he's actually using Visual Studio Code, and it works really well. He did a couple tricks, and everything worked perfectly. One of the challenges on the Mac is if you have a Mac, there is a problem with NuGet. Their NuGet dialog doesn't work, so you got to use the command line, which maybe isn't always desirable. So if you're wondering, this is Visual Studio 2022, probably Enterprise or Professional, and it is the preview. So I'm going to click Create New Project. And what I want to do for this example is a Blazor server app. Of course, there is a couple very slight differences between Blazor Server and Blazor WASM from your perspective when you're getting Ignite UI set up, and I'll try to highlight those as well. I'm going to click Next. We're going to call this Webinar Demo Blazor, and we'll click, and we'll use .NET 7 is fine. It doesn't matter for what we're doing today. So how do I get going with Blazor? Keep in mind, if I open up my browser here and I go over to Infragistics website, and I click this drop down and I go to Blazor, this is the Blazor product page. So you got a bunch of information here, but I'm going to go ahead and click View Blazor Samples. If I go to Getting Started, everything I'm going to show you is in the docs, right? So feel free to go through the docs, but it's always a lot easier to see something on video. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to light up this application with Blazor. So I'm going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. I'm going to click Browse, and I'm going to type in Ignite UI Blazor. So Ignite UI Blazor ships in the form of NuGet. So you can see here, I've got Ignite UI Blazor, Documents Core, Blazor Trial, Blazor, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to click this Ignite UI Blazor, which is the entire Blazor package. I'm going to go ahead and click Install. It does the usual. I accept my licenses, and I am good to go. So now Blazor is in my project. Now there's a couple things that I need to do to sort of set this up. I'm going to go to my imports. This is a new feature with .NET 6 or maybe even .NET 5 is these global usings. So I'm going to tell it to use the Ignite UI Blazor .controls that we just added to our application. So that's like step one. Now, step two is to go to program.cs. Now, the way that we do this is we're adding services to the builder here. So there's a couple ways to do this. The easiest way, let's say you're doing like a whole hog Ignite UI app and you're using every single control. The easiest thing to do is to say add Ignite UI Blazor. So in this case, I'm just going to say add Ignite UI Blazor. And at this point, all of my stuff is like in the application and it's ready to go. So for example, if I'm using a drop down or a button or a combo box or an avatar, all these controls are available to me now. But if you just want to do something like a little bit more efficient and just use the grid, you can use a very similar syntax. So I can say builder.services.add Ignite UI Blazor, the same thing, Ignite UI Blazor. And then what you want to do is tell it what to add. So I'm going to say type of, and what do I want to add? I want to add the IGB grid module. So in this case, just doing add Ignite UI Blazor, adding the grid module, it's only going to add the grid, right? All the other stuff isn't there. So what happens is when it builds out, it'll just be a little bit lighter package. But of course, most of the time that is irrelevant. Even in Blazor WASM, it doesn't really matter. So I'll just go ahead and leave that the way it is. So the next step, basically step 3, is to add some CSS, right? So there are CSS dependencies, of course, that you are going to have to use to light up the application. Blazor has its own stuff going on here. We're going to leave all of that alone. I have a nice cheat sheet here. You don't have to watch me type in CSS references, but in this case, I am using the grid theme for light Bootstrap. Now we ship Bootstrap, Indigo, Material, and there's one more. Anyway, we ship multiple themes. What you can do here is simply change these to the theme that you want. Let's say you want to use dark material. So I can type in here dark material. And now it's going to just update the grid to dark material. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with the rest of your app, which is where something like App Builder comes in handy because, App Builder will generate the themes and the styles for all of your application. So I'm just going to stick with my light Bootstrap like so, and that's it. At this point, I've added my imports. I've told the builder to include Blazor, and I've added my theme. So the next thing that I want to do is actually start building out my application. I want to add a grid. So I'm going to go to my index.razor. This is the default page that ships with these Blazor applications. And what I want to do is use the IGB grid control. So here I've got IGB grid. Now, this is how easy it is to get started. What I know I have is I have a data set up in the cloud, and I'm going to copy this URL and I'm going to go to my browser again. And let's go ahead and see what we've got up in the cloud. If you remember, we're always using my Northwind Cloud API, which is it's a .NET Web API. And that .NET Web API is going to an Azure database and it's pulling back data. And it's, of course, a JSON format. So great, I have that up in the cloud. So what I want to do is I want to tell the grid to auto-generate columns for that specific data source. So I'm going to say auto-generate equals true. Let's make sure we use double quotes here. And then the next thing that I want to do is set the data. So the data needs to be equal to what I just told it. So we have something called remote from JSON. So I'm going to copy this over here. I'll paste it in. And you've seen this before if you've watched any of the webinars, because we do the same thing with the charts, right? Like the charts, I can have a remote data. It's a URI and it just magically happens. So, okay, I'm done. I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to set my grid height equal to like 825 pixels. And I think that's all I need to do. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. I'll go ahead and save everything. Let's run it. It's probably going to open up on my other monitor here. So I'll slide it over. And come on, Blazor, fire up. Oh, look at that. We have it on our main monitor. So I got lucky. It rendered right where it should. But you can see with 2 lines of code, adding a few imports or 1 import and a NuGet package, I'm ready to rock and roll. So here I have a grid, basic functionality. It's not doing everything that I need except basically displaying data. So I can't move columns. I really can't do much. So now let's go ahead and add a few more features. And that was a little big for me. So I'm going to change it to 800 pixels. So let's do a few things to this grid. So we have a few properties that we can set. So I'm going to say allow filtering on this grid equals to true. And if you remember that we have this property called filter mode. So filter mode gives you the ability to set one of our multiple filter modes. On my next demo, I'm going to show you how that works. But I want to do filter mode dot. I'm going to do Excel style filter. The other thing that I want to do is tell the grid that I will really like it to do allow column moving. So I really want column moving because that's a cool feature. And then there's another feature that I always do, you might not want to do. And I'm going to go into the demo and show you this later. But we have a property called display density. And display density is how tight the columns are in the grid. But display density also takes over all the other controls that the grid interacts with. So it's kind of cool. All right, we're good to go. That's all I wanted to do here. Let's hit save. Let's hit run again. And maybe next time we'll try hot reload because that should work just as well. So here's my grid again. I made it a little bit shorter so it doesn't have the funky double scroll bar. Now look what happens. On my grid, I can move columns. On this drop down, I've got my Excel style filter. So I can do things like, let's search for anything with B here. And I'm going to say select all search results, click apply. Now everything with the B shows up. Let's go back here. I'm going to clear all my column filters. I can do a text filter. Let's do everything that contains, the letter A, and let's apply that. So now I have the letter A, everything with the letter A. Not that exciting, but it gives you the idea that you can do any type of filter that you want with this guy. And of course, we're going to continue to look at that in today's webinar. I can do things like column pinning. So now that column is pinned to the left. A nice thing about enabling column moving and column pinning is, for example, I can now drag a column into the pinned area, just like so. The grid supports column pinning to the left and column pinning to the right. So it's really up to you how column pinning actually works. Some other neat things here, column moving. So let's move this column over here. I don't want to show postal code maybe, so let's hide this column. I'll go ahead and hide postal code and maybe hide orders. Don't need that. Don't need customer types. Boom. Beautiful grid. Looks great. I've written no actual code. I've just done all of this through configuration, but we're really not done yet. I want to do a couple more things. I'm going to leave this app just like it is, and we're going to do a little hot reload. So what I want to do is, you noticed I hid that column. So how do I give that back to the user in a UI? How can I let them pick and choose what they want to hide? Maybe pick and choose what they want to pin, maybe even some other options. So we've got this concept called the IGB Grid Toolbar. So the IGB Grid Toolbar is a control that tacks onto the grid that lets you add capabilities, that you may or may not want. So we have this concept called grid actions. I'm going to copy in some grid actions here, and they're pretty self-explanatory. I want to enable pinning. I want to enable hiding, and I want to enable exporting And then finally, I want to give this guy a title. So I'm going to give him a title, the IGB Grid Toolbar title. And this is just going to be the Blazor 101 webinar kickoff demo, like so. All right, let's go ahead, save, hot reload, go back to our browser, go back here. Our hot reload happened. And you can see, actually, it actually persisted my state. That was actually pretty nice. But what else just happened? I've got my grid toolbar. How slick is that? So if I go to region and I hide region from the Excel style filter dropdown, what's going to happen is in my dropdown here, it's actually showing me that region is hidden and everything else is selected. So I can very easily just go through here and modify this. And you can see that the grid is actually changing in real time. If I go here and I select all or show all, everything's back to normal. Now let me go ahead and pin country to the left. So now country is pinned to the left and it shows me that one item is pinned. And actually we want country and let's pin contact title to the left like so. And now we've got this other cool thing, export. So I want to go ahead and export this grid in its current state to Excel. And I'm going to open this file up and I'll slide it back over here. And here's my Excel file. Now what's slick here is notice what's happening. It preserved my pin columns to the left. So it's like groundbreaking. No one does this stuff. We even export charts, native charts. So it's pretty amazing what we can pull off with this grid. So okay, this is all cool, fine and dandy, but there's maybe some more features that I want to enable, or maybe I want a little bit more control over how my grid is actually constructed. So what I want to do is change auto generate from true to false. Now, this is what's going to happen. If I hit save and I go back to this guy, it'll do its hot reload here. Let's see. Oh, maybe I didn't hit hot reload. There we go. There's our checkbox. All right, now let's hit refresh. You'll notice I have nothing in the grid because I told it don't auto generate all those columns, but I got all my other features here. So what I want to do now is add some of those columns. So over here in my cheat sheet, I have my IGB grid column collection. And let me scroll to the right and show you what just happened. I added a bunch of IGB columns. Now, IGB columns have a lot of configuration that you can do, and you're going to see even more of this in the next 10, 15 minutes as we go through the webinar. You can see I can set the field types. I want to bind it to customer ID. I want the data type to be data type.string. I want the header to be something that looks kind of nice. I want it to allow grouping. I want it to allow sorting, resizable. I'll allow it to be hidden, selectable false, has summaries true, right? Notice the other ones don't have has summaries, but this one does say has summaries. So I am just kind of adding more capabilities to this guy through the column configuration. I'm going to hit my hot refresh or my hot reload and bam, now I've got a grid with a few more features. You can see I've got count 91 here in my summaries. I've got an Outlook group by. So let's go ahead and group by, I guess, city, maybe not city. Let's go ahead and group by contact title. And then let's go ahead and pin country to the left. I'm going to pin country to the left. So I got a few things going on here. I'm grouped for free. There was no code. I didn't do anything. It's just all through configuration. Now let's go ahead and export this to Excel again. And let's take a look and see what this looks like. Oh, wow, look at that. That was awfully fast. But look at how this works. How amazing is this? I have column pinning, but I also have column grouping. So all the groups were persisted in my export to Excel. Absolutely unbelievable how powerful this is. So I think that's all I want to do for just the getting started basic stuff. Looks like everyone is answering all kinds of questions on the chat. Yep. Okay, cool. So nothing there really to highlight. Let's go over to my app. But before I go to my app, I want to highlight something. You might be saying to yourself, this is a lot of code for me to write. And yeah, I 100% agree. It's a lot of code for you to write. I don't want to write that code. No one has time to sit there and write column configuration code, which is why you all have access to App Builder. So I'm going to sign into App Builder. I'm going to go ahead and create a new application, new app, just do a blank template. And I'm going to do a Control E. I'm going to go to grid. There's my grid. I'm going to go back here. This is that web API that I was using, right? Like so. Let's go here, go to my data plus REST API, add URL, paste in my REST API, save this. This will be called webinar customers, I guess. I have so many things I got to kind of remember what I already have, but there you go. We're already pulling everything in. We'll leave it at table 1. I'm going to click done. And I'm going to select my grid. I'm going to go to data, go down here, webinar customers demo table. And it's now live data from the web. So I go to preview and I make this bigger, and then I select and I right click and I copy and I paste it in my app. So I don't even need to code generate. I don't need to do all this stuff. Like, oh, I don't really want to do like height, fixed height. I just copy the CSS and then I will set the scope of that CSS in here and I'm done, right? So this is where web or app builder becomes very, very powerful as a time saver and just to like, you know, accelerate what you're trying to do. So this application, you can see I put together literally in no time. All right, let's go to another app. So this is the second app that I wanted to show you guys. Again, this is up on GitHub. There's a couple tips and tricks in here. Some of these things are in the docs, some of them aren't, but for the most part, what I wanted to show was some different features and then how they get configured in the actual grid. So I showed you now that remote data binding. Well, for a straight up data binding, like just doing a web service, for example, if we go take a look at data binding, in this case, my data is a data set or a object called auto users people with cars. So what I'm doing in my application code is I'm saying get people with cars. Well, where is get people with cars? If I go to the get people with cars definition, it's in an interface called auto user service. So if I go to my data and I go to my auto user service, you can see that I'm calling a web service out to, you know, my web API to pull in data, populate my object, and then use that object to bind to the grid. So doing things with data binding is super easy with the grid. There's multiple ways to do it. Essentially, you're just populating objects and you're sticking them into or telling the grid to bind to those objects. You can very easily generate any type of code for data binding with App Builder. So if you're unsure, if you're just a beginner, if you want to get started, just let App Builder do it just the way that I showed you. And then remote data binding is the same thing. I call it remote, but there's other ways to do data binding in the grid. This is using the same concept that I just showed you. We have other features in the grid as well. So if you go to our docs, you can see like, you know, load on demand, you know, virtual forever endless scrolling, like you have a billion rows in your database and you're just chunking data as you go. We support the real-time updates, you know, signal R updates, so things like that. So depending on your scenario, you can do the super advanced stuff or you can do the basic core stuff, like just doing data binding. Maybe if it's something really basic, using this remote JSON feature, which is actually pretty cool and pretty powerful. Column interactions, I sort of already went through all of these things. You get these for free, right? You're just turning on and off properties to enable these column interactions. So, you know, you saw that in the first demo. There's really not much to giving your end users a whole host of user experience without you writing any code. Now, filtering, there's a few options for filtering. I showed you in my sample the Excel style filtering, which is this dropdown. It's very similar to what you see in Excel. We've added a few more capabilities here. So we've got like pinning and hiding and things like that. But there's also this quick filter concept. So for example, if I go to filter on this column, you can see I can do filtering like, let's say starts with, and I'm going to say MR. So now this starts with MR, and I can add another filter value, ends with, let's do an ends with S. So now I get all of the MR and S. So you can continue to do anding or oring with this filter to either limit data or expand data. So the quick filter is actually very powerful. Over here, you've got a reset button, and I can close this out and get back to this UI. And then finally, we have the advanced filter. The advanced filter is a dialog which allows you to do groups of anding and oring. So for example, if I want to, oh, looks like my column dropdown is not working here. Let me try this again. Oh, let me see if I can type in here. Now, it looks like I did something messed up there, but anyway, the idea with the advanced filter is if you have a bunch of ands and a bunch of ors, and you want to do within those ands and ors, other ands and ors, you have a very complex data set. This is like a query builder almost. It'll let you generate a very extensive filter, and then we even let you save that out as JSON. So it's actually a pretty powerful dialog, pretty slick stuff. Grouping and sorting. In my first demo, I showed you that allow grouping, and then I just drag and drop. It was automatic. What I'm doing here is I'm setting this programmatically. So when I first load up this screen, I actually want this to show something grouped by default. So if I go over to, let's see, grouping sorting over here, you can see I've got my grid here. Everything looks fine. This is Blazor. I have no idea why you get these squigglies, but on my after render async, what I'm doing is the first time that this grid renders, I'm creating some grouping expressions, and you can have as many grouping expressions as you want, because of course you can have multiple fields grouped. So in this case, I have a single field grouped by default, title of courtesy, which is Miss, Mr., Mrs., and all that, doctor. And then I'm setting the sorting direction. So to programmatically set this stuff, it's super easy to do. There's other ways to do it. There's like 10 ways to skin a cat. But this is the most efficient and maybe the most modern way to approach adding grouping expressions to your grid. Now, in the case of doing something like this, where it's essentially a property, like I've got grouping expression 1, on the grid itself, we have a property called grouping expressions. And what I would do is I would say grouping expression 1, or whatever the heck I call this thing. Yep, grouping expression 1. So this would achieve the same thing. So if this was commented out and this was enabled, they would be doing the same thing. The only thing what you're doing here is you're telling the grid, hey, go ahead and use grouping expression 1 when you load the grid. So again, just more declarative goo that you can do to make working with the grid really, really easy. Okay, headers and footers. This is really slick. Most enterprise grids have, you know, hundreds of rows or hundreds of columns of data, and you need a way to organize this. So what we've done in the grids is we give you a way to do column grouping. So column grouping allows you to have these multi-row layouts inside of the grid. These are really easy to set up. So here, if we look at column grouping, headers and footers, here you can see that I've got my IGB columns, but what I've introduced is an IGB column group. And then I've got groups within groups. So the way that you need to make sure this works perfectly is that when you create a column header like this, you need to tell the, oh, actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm thinking about collapsible groups. We'll talk about collapsible groups in a second. This is pretty straightforward. Just do groups, IGB column groups, add groups within groups. You can see I have multiple groups within groups here. All the other stuff is the same, very easy to set up. And the group IG column group header is what dictates, you know, what ends up here, like employee address details. And then all my other features still work. Everything works as you would expect. So the one that's a little bit more rich is the column grouping, which is a collapsible column group. So here I can expand and collapse column group. So here I've got all my address fields showing. Now I'm going to collapse this, and I'm just showing the address, country. Here, I've got employee first name, last name showing. I'm going to collapse this, and I've got first name, last name, title of courtesy, etc. So all of these things are done by basically telling the grid what to show when the group is collapsed. So that's a little bit more work on your part. So if we go back to collapsible column groups, let's see what this guy's called: headers and footers, grouping, sorting, display, conditional, column groups. Yeah, it's always hard to see when you're doing a webinar. But anyway, you can see there's a new property we introduced here: visible when collapsed. So I've got my IGB column group. In my IGB column group, I'm adding properties: visible when collapsed, true or false. But in order to make sure that maybe the last name and first name are visible when it's expanded and collapsed, you need to repeat those columns. So in this case, I have visible when collapsed equals false. Visible when collapsed equals true. So what that's going to mean is those two columns essentially are always visible. I don't think there's a better way to do this. If anyone online thinks there is on our team, let me know, but this is how I do it and it works perfectly. So now you'll see when I do my collapsing, or that's expanding, but then when I collapse, first name and last name remain visible. This is a very big feature for financial services, because when you think about the number of columns that you have, hundreds of columns, but they mean something. So a lot of times you just want to see that roll-up column, or you want to see a summary column. And then if the broker needs to actually look at all that additional data, they can go ahead and do it. All right, conditional styling. This is really slick. And this is a very cool tip and trick. You will notice I have two things happening here. I've got the red line on some columns, and then I've got some fields that the for color is blue. So I'm kind of messing with these styles here. But you'll notice that this red line is if the manager ID is 45, got this red line, and I've got this blue font if it's Mr. So the way that this works, it's a little bit advanced. So when you're working with Blazor, Blazor is essentially a .NET thing that's running on the client. So you're writing in C#, but this is running in JavaScript. So in order for components to actually work like our components, there needs to be a .NET thing and then like a C# or a JavaScript thing, because you're really running in the browser in JavaScript for something like Blazor Server. So what we do is we have these escape hatches for you to do custom things. You can use C# code. There's a cell fragment, or there's something called IGB cell fragment, IGB row, something like that. Or you can just use JavaScript, right? So in that example, I'm actually using JavaScript. So I'm going to look at my conditional styling sample here. And in this case, on the IGB grid, I'm saying don't use a row style, use a row style script. And the row style script should be called row style handler. And for the column employee, use I'm not going to go even column. I'm not going to show that. I'm going to show the title of courtesy. For the title of courtesy, use a body template script. And I want that body template script to be highlight Mr. So I have a row style handler, and I have a highlight Mr. handler, a script handler. And you'll notice there's nothing else here. Where the heck is that code? Well, that code is in my host.cshtml, because this is my index.html. And this happens to be where I have my JavaScript. I could have put a JavaScript file. I just didn't. So in this case, what we're doing is we're calling IG register script when this application loads. And I want to register a JavaScript function called highlight Mr. What is highlight Mr. going to do? Whenever it's called, it's going to inspect the context of whatever it's passed. In this case, we're going to pull out the cell value. I'm going to check that value. And if the value is Mr., I want it to be blue. That's as easy as it is. Now, for the row style handler, what I'm doing here is I'm saying if it's a grid row, well, passing in the context here, I want to change the background of the row to red or whatever this color is. Otherwise, leave it the way that it is, leave it white. So I'm checking to see if the manager ID is 45. So by doing a little bit of JavaScript, all of a sudden I have full control over my grid. One of the things that we want to do in the future is add a like conditional formatting engine like we have in WPF, and then that'll end up in Blazor and probably in Angular as well. Display density, I showed this before, but here I've got a little selector. Comfortable is, a decent width, height width. Cozy is a little bit tighter, so a little bit easier to read, maybe a standard business app, CRM app. Compact, you're in financial services, every pixel counts. You can get probably 5 or 8 more rows of data on your grid if you're using compact. And of course, you can override this. You can make this even more compact. It's all up to you, but we give you 3 options for display density. And then a couple more I want to highlight. We're well over time, but I want to show a couple ways to do the image column. If anyone watched the webinar back in November or October when we started to talk about some of this stuff, we actually did the image column a little bit differently. So in this case, I showed an image, but I was actually using JavaScript to show the image. Well, we've actually added an image column type now. So if I go over to this sample and we go to, I think it's called column templates, we will go to avatar URL and column type equals image, which is sweet. So we've got column type equals date, column type equals string, column type equals number, which are all very important to set. And in this case, let me scroll back. The data it's a URL. So we're taking the URL, we're just going to pop it into an image. While we're here, let me highlight one other thing. You'll notice here that I had image type equals date. When I do this drop down, I'm actually getting a date filter with date options. So this is critical. Notice next month, last month, this month, all this stuff. If I go back to this, and if you do not set your column types and you just say, I'm going to leave everything as a string, this is what happens. And this is where auto generate equals true falls down a bit, because auto generate equals true will give you strings. So now when I do this, I have strings and I don't have dates. I have text filters. So it's not useful. So make sure you're setting your column types correctly, because if you don't, everything ends up being a string. Now for JavaScript, so let's go back. If I want to do the same thing, let's go to column templates 1. I'm doing this body template script again, and I'm doing an image cell template. So if I go back to my host.cs.html and we go to our image cell template, this is what we did originally before we added that column type. So we had this, we knew this was like, okay, we need to just continue to improve our column types. And this is how you would have done it in the past. They're both equally as performant. They both work really well. And as I said, we have this wrapper in Blazor and C#, and then we're actually generating JavaScript. This is what we are doing when we say image column type equals image, right? Image column type dot image. So that is essentially what we have to do, all the work that we're doing behind the scenes for this stuff. So let's go to row actions. You've seen this a lot if you've gone to any of the webinars, because we use row actions a lot for CRUD and data entry. So one of the things that you get with row actions is this ability to pin rows to the top of the grid, like so. And then here it says that it's pinned. It kind of highlights in gray. I can just go ahead and unpin. But row actions has some other features, like you can enable the data entry features with row actions. So if we look at row actions, you'll notice I've got the IGB grid editing actions commented out. And whoops, what the heck did I just do there? Let's go back to row actions. And there, we'll go ahead and save this guy. We'll do our hot reload. And what we'll see is we have additional row actions right now. Looks like there's an error. Oh, there we go. So I've got my pin, my edit, my add, and my delete button. We do have a backlog item to kind of make this background a little better so you can see it more. But anyway, row actions are actually really slick. If you're using something like SharePoint, Gmail, all these modern apps have this ability for the user to do stuff right on the canvas. They don't have to go to buttons up in the right or left. And you can add your own buttons as well. So this is completely customizable. Paging, of course, everyone expects paging. We have a full pager. You can customize the way this behaves. And then I've already talked about the exporting and toolbar. There's one more thing that I want to show. I want to go back up to, I think, remote data. Let me see. Yeah, okay. Remote data was where I had that remote JSON, and then I passed it the URL. Well, you'll also notice here, units in stock, I've got a summary here. So the default summary behavior, if I go to filtering, grouping, oh, actually, no, I think it was column interactions. No, I guess I don't have summaries anywhere. Well, if you remember, the default summaries had things like count. Oh, here's one, column groups. We have count, min, max, sum, average. So you can tell a column what to summarize by within our defaults. And it's like no code on your part. You're saying, you know, give me the min, give me the max. If you just say has summaries equals true, you get all of these guys for free. Now, if I go to remote data, I want to do something different. I want to take data from a bunch of different columns, and I want to do a custom summary. I want to say I have 77 products, total items 319, discontinued products 8, total discontinued items, whatever that number happens to be. I don't have resizing here, so I can't see it. And again, this is another thing that you can do through that escape hatch, which is your JavaScript. So in this case, if I scroll down, I've got this function here called Web Grid Custom Summary. So what I'm saying is if the field for the event, the args that are being passed in is units in stock, I want the summaries for that column to be the Web Grid Discontinued Summary. So here is the Web Grid Discontinued Summary. What are we doing here? We're actually just creating another array back to the client or back to the app, the grid, which has my products, my total items, my discontinued products, and my total discontinued items. So you can then, or you can create any type of summary based on any column in the grid and stick it into a single column. So now if I go to remote data, let's go to remote data. You will see here that my column initialization script is Web Grid Custom Summary. And that's all I need to do. On units in price, or was it units in stock, I say has summary equals true. So I'm just saying, stick it there. I'm allowing summaries. Please, when you're rendering this on the client, pull this data together, create some new text and value, and stick it under the summary. So very powerful, very big in financial services because they're doing all kinds of summaries based on data that might not even be visible in the grid, but they need to show it in a specific column. So with that, it's all we're going to show today. Actually, no, I have one more demo I want to show. This was a latecomer. What I wanted to do was highlight, again, a couple things here. This is a combo box. We have this IGB grid multi-column combo, and I wanted to highlight how you could use that in a grid. So Zdravko and his team, they pulled together this killer sample late last night, and it's just awesome. But here, what we've got is I've got my grid, right? There's my IGB grid. And then what I'm doing is I am telling it to use this multi-column combo box template. And here is my multi-column combo box template. All it is a combo box. So anything that you want to template in the grid, you have that JavaScript backdoor, or you can do it in C# using render fragment. What do I want to render? I want to render the cell template, IGB cell template context. So let's go ahead and run this guy and we will see how it looks. Oops, I can't run both at the same time because they're using the same URL. All right. So this is our grid. It's the employees table. And then inside the employees table, I've got a country. And what's nice about this is, of course, this is the multi-column combo. So you can select items. Let's get rid of my Bing Chrome autocomplete. I can just start typing and I can use, down arrow and select stuff, but very powerful. And this doesn't have to be a combo. This could be an avatar. It could be a PDF. Anything that you want to render in a cell, you can render. So the other thing, a very top request, and this came up in the last webinar as well, is I don't want this multi-column combo box. I want a single column combo box. Well, you will have that in the next release for Blazor, because we already have it in Angular. We already have it in web components. We're going to have a much simpler combo box, which doesn't have like all these features, because most of the time you don't need all these features. So stay tuned for that combo box. It's coming soon, but this is awesome. It does show you how to do another trick in terms of column templates and how you can use these products together. And this is doing essentially what we would do in JavaScript, but just doing it in C#. So you're using a different body template instead of body template script, and it just kind of happens. All right, so with that, we need to wrap up. Don't think that, I have so much time on my hands that I did that app, like the whole menu and all that. Like, this is all built with App Builder. Everything I did was built with App Builder. Then what I did is all the things that I needed to do in code, I just went and added after. So this entire project was written in App Builder, like this beautiful menu and all this good stuff. I'll give you an example. Filtering. I added a tab with 3 tabs. I added 3 grids and I added filter and I said, do Excel style. For this guy, I changed from Excel style to quick filtering. For this guy, I hit the plus sign and I said advanced filtering. And that's all I did to get that to work. I didn't do anything. I didn't sit there and write all that. It would be way too much work. Conditional styling, of course, that's all code. I had to write all that code. Remote data, I wrote all that code. Data binding, App Builder did it all for me. Column interactions, all App Builder. Filtering, all App Builder. Grouping and sorting, all App Builder. Headers and footers, I went ahead and added the custom layout on the grid because we don't support multi-row headers yet. It's coming in the next couple months. Column groups, or the collapsible column groups, all done outside. Grid toolbar I did in App Builder, of course. Pager, row actions, all this stuff I did in App Builder. And then as I was building my app and I realized, oh, I needed something different or whatever, I would go into App Builder. I might just modify one of these screens. I go and I just go into the code view, and then I would take stuff from the code view that I might need, like, oh crap, what's the name of that property? But at the same time, our documentation is really good. So if you go to our Blazor docs and you use that in conjunction with Discord, in conjunction with webinars and samples, like you can become a master at this stuff. So App Builder drove this demo. So thank you, App Builder team, because, you took something that would have taken probably, 5 or 6 or 7 hours of just getting everything working to, like, this part was done in, 30 minutes, maybe 45, I don't know. And then I spent a few hours doing all the other code, right? So I'm using, our docs, and I'm using other samples and things like that to construct everything. So yeah, I use our tools to build this stuff as well. Yep. So next webinar, blazorcrud.net 7. I'm almost positive it's March 16th. If, you can always just go to our page and sign up again. You'll absolutely get our emails, reminders to join that. .net, I was reading this blog this morning. Jesse wanted some stuff on .net 7, and the gurus there said they did 1,000 performance improvements in .net 7. So we'll see. Let's put it to the test and see what happens. So again, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks, George. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Stravko. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Jesse, JJ. Thanks to all of you customers who took your time. We really appreciate you. Couldn't do this without you. We need your feedback. And yeah, for things that you want to learn and don't know, please go to Discord. Like Brian, Tim, docs are never ending. They are never ending. Hey, I find things I can't figure out in our docs, and then I go over to our product team. You guys don't have the luxury of that, but you do have Discord, and we are fixing docs every day, adding more stuff, learning, etc. So thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate it. And we will see you at the next webinar.